So when legislative leaders came together earlier this week to announce that a deal on a property tax cap was nearly complete, E.J. McMahon of the Empire Center for New York State Policy was there to applaud the news. Now, 2 days later, he's raising some concerns about the Assembly version of that bill, namely that the tax cap will have a sunset date instead of being tied to rent regulations. It's a little bit confusing. In an op-ed piece published today, McMahon called the sunset date for a poison pill for the tax cap because it would make it easier for lawmakers to get rid of the cap in the future if they decide that they really don't like it. Here to explain more about the sunset and whether it's actually a deal breaker is E.J. McMahon. E.J., it's good to see you.
Thank you. Hello.
I'm a little confused on this. My understanding, and also I was in Western New York, so I was following it from afar, was that this sunset, quote unquote, was actually tied to rent regulations, which are set to expire on June 15th, but we all sort of expect that they will be extended because it's a major priority for the Assembly Democrats. So if you would just explain what's going on here and clear things up.
Well, the Speaker of the Assembly introduced a bill sponsored by the Speaker himself and other leading members of the Assembly on Monday.
Right.
The bill is Assembly Bill 7916, and the bill in most respects conforms to the tax cap proposed by Governor Cuomo. It has a somewhat different statutory structure, but basically it does what Governor Cuomo's bill did. It caps tax levy increases at 2% of the rate of inflation, whichever is less.
Okay.
No significant changes from the governor's bill with two exceptions. One exception, which I, among others, had actually urged on the legislature, was that it allows some growth for any taxes generated in a given year by newly constructed facilities or projects. So if there's a new housing subdivision, a new factory or office building, the taxes that physical improvement in property generates would not count against the levy cap and when it goes on the tax rolls, because otherwise you'd have a disincentive to favor economic growth.
Right, got it.
The only other exception is a partial and very partial exclusion of pensions, rising pension costs, which are the fastest growing category of local government costs. It's not a full exclusion of pension costs, it's a partial exclusion. It's a little complicated the way it works, but in effect, at worst, it'll convert in some years in some places a 2% or inflation tax cap into a tax cap of maybe 3%, maybe a little more in some school districts in a couple of coming years.
Okay, so this all seems pretty good.
Pretty
This
straightforward.
seems pretty straightforward and fairly standard. What the governor had wanted was a hard 2% cap. What we heard from the Assembly Democrats was, we don't like that because, effectively, look, the teachers union doesn't like it. The
Right.
teachers union now is on the warpath. They can't
Right.
stand this. They're very upset.
Right.
Now comes the rub, if you will.
Right.
The Speaker said early in this session, you know, philosophically, the tax cap is connected to rent regulations because both enable people to afford wherever it is they live. If you rent an apartment, it enables you to keep an affordable apartment in New York City where it's very expensive. If you own a home, it enables you to, and not cuts your taxes, mind you, but just slow the growth of your ever-escalating taxes. So that's linkage. The governor said he didn't want it. Now it's linked. So what's the problem?
Well, I mean, obviously, in reality, there is nothing, no real similarity or no link, no reason other than politics to link a property tax cap for all of New York except New York City to a set of rent regulations that apply almost entirely within New York City, in fact, mainly in Manhattan. But politically, we all knew that ultimately their fates would be intertwined because the Speaker does not really want to do a tax cap bill as broad and tight as the governor's proposal under any circumstances, and normally would not, except there's something he really needs, and he needs it every 7 or 8 years. And that thing he really needs is to renew the so-called temporary rent control and rent regulation laws for New York City. So it was inevitable that as we got closer to the end of session, some sort of linkage would be created between the two, and it has been.
So now what the Speaker said was, let us put a sunset in here, which in Albany parlance means the bill ends, goes away,
Right.
stops existing. Let us put a sunset in for the cap such that every 8 years, like you just mentioned, when the rent laws are revisited, we also revisit the cap. The governor, who initially said no sunset, needed to get a deal, quite clearly, and we can talk about the political implications of this in a moment, but needed to get a deal with Assembly Democrats because we all thought that they were the ones who were going to be the sticking point. So he said, okay, sunset. And what he said was, it makes sense to revisit an issue, so every 8 years, it's kind of a long time, actually. It's 2 gubernatorial cycles, actually, that we'll look at it again and we'll see if it's working. Then the Speaker says, when you actually see the bill, he said this in an interview, okay, the date will correspond to the date that rent regulations expires. That seems to be different somehow in your mind? I don't get that.
Yeah, well, look, first of all, we have actually seen the bill. We've seen the bill for several days now. The bill
you've
he's
got
sponsored
it,
is out. I have
actually.
it in my hands.
Yeah.
The very final, the last clause of the bill is the bill, as typical, includes the effective date. It says this act shall take effect immediately. It further indicates which fiscal years of schools and localities are affected. And then it contains some unique, very clever language that I think is very inventive. As you know, as you indicated, I think the governor did not want to propose a temporary property tax cap. The tax cap's effect, by the way, will compound over time. This is a tax cap that will have a greater and greater effect on taxes, frankly, measured over decades. I mean, 8 years is not a long period of time when it comes to the impact of a tax cap. A decade, at least, is where you begin to see a difference. So he had no cap. It was a permanent law. There's no a temporary tax cap really doesn't make sense. The bill is not temporary and does not have a sunset in it. I mean, to repeat, the Speaker's bill does not have a sunset in it. What it has is a clause at the end. I'll paraphrase because it's complicated legalese, about 200 words long. What it says is, this law shall remain in effect for as long as New York State has declared a temporary rent emergency in New York City.
But that's always.
Bingo. I mean, we've had a temporary rent emergency in New York City since Harry Truman's first term.
Okay.
As long as we're all sitting here, there will be a temporary rent emergency in New York City.
Well, more so, as long as Sheldon Silver is Speaker, or as long as the Speaker of the Assembly is somebody who comes out of New York City and has to play to those constituents. And if we've seen that the Speaker of the Assembly comes out of New York City, I mean, that's just pretty much what happens, right?
The best tax cap is obviously the ideal, and what really we need is a permanent cap. The very next best thing to permanent is a pretty airtight clause that says this will last only as long as rent control, because we know rent control will last. And it does not require a revisiting or reevaluation. Basically, the tax cap will automatically remain in effect or resume being in effect as long as rent control is renewed, which, of course, will always happen.
So what are you worried about exactly here? Because it seems like you're a little worried. I mean, this op-ed says a poison pill for the tax cap, question mark.
What happened was that the Speaker went on a radio show here in Albany yesterday and was asked, well, this is kind of interesting language at the end of the bill. It doesn't seem to really represent a sunset, but it's kind of different. It seems almost unique. And his response was, and I'm again closely paraphrasing, was, well, no, it's not really unique. And when you see the final bill will have a date in it. Now, that was what brought me up short, and a lot of other people who support the bill, because what do you mean another bill? This is the bill. In other words, when you have in Albany a kumbaya press conference where you say we've reached agreement on a bill, this is the bill.
Yeah, but that press conference, and I saw the footage, was not kumbaya. Senate Majority Leader Dean Skelos looked awfully unhappy for a kumbaya. I thought he looked unhappy personally.
Well, here's the thing. I think he probably looked unhappy because he senses that speaking of linkage with rent control, that the press conference is not quite indirectly linked to an effort to get him to rush into an agreement on the technical specifics of a rent control extension that he wants some time to see, and he has not seen a bill on that yet. So I understand that. I think, unfortunately, while the Senate, in fact, is on record in favor of a tax cap and passed the governor's bill as soon as he put it out, there's been ambiguity created by the way that the Senate Majority Leader and some other Senates have discussed the bill. They say they're committed to it, and then they don't. It's never quite clear. And I think that it would be cleared up if they said, look, we've got a lot of work to do on rent control, but yes, this bill is fine as far as we're concerned. They're not saying that.
No, and also the Speaker is saying, it seems almost a little bit like a game of chicken. The Speaker is saying, we're not passing this bill unless there's rent control.
Well, that's okay.
Well, the Senate, but also already, as you mentioned, already passed the governor's bill, right? And they're saying, well, wait a minute, we want to see the rent control bill before we agree to pass this new bill.
The kindest interpretation of it is that it's just a game of chicken, which would be predictable, that the Speaker is very naturally saying, well, I want to see a rent control bill, and, and the Senate is naturally saying, what's the rush? Hey, don't rush us. We've got 2 weeks. Where is it?
Right.
That's okay. I think if that was all that was going on, it's just that, and it could be that a lot of this talk is meaningless. But what I wrote about today was simply, be careful, don't pop any champagne corks yet, because when people begin talking openly about revisiting a bill that from start to finish is a good bill and the basic bill that needs to be enacted, and which if changed in any respect would suddenly become a not good bill, that's something to be concerned about.
Okay, well, here's what we see in Albany. The deal comes together, the deal falls apart. The deal comes together,
exactly.
The deal falls apart. So maybe this is only just the Albany dance. We will keep tabs on it, of course. You'll be back, and I want to thank you very much, EJ, for being here, because this is a complicated issue. So thanks a lot.
You're welcome.